This is a message of thanks and gratitude to all you amazing Reluctant Preppers who are making Reluctant Preppers possible by supporting our mission on Patreon. With your help, we're overcoming a 75% drop in YouTube earnings because you're not standing still, but are doing something about it and taking action by going to patreon.com/reluctantpreppers and pledging to keep us on the air. Now our team is 42 patrons strong and growing, and when we reach 100 patrons, we'll start sending out tokens of gratitude as a handwritten note from your host, Dunnigan Kaiser, and an autograph signed on a U.S. Silver Eagle to one of our patrons selected at random each and every month. If you haven't yet taken the step of joining in to support Reluctant Preppers, it's so easy. Just go to patreon.com/reluctantpreppers and pledge any amount you can. You guys are awesome, and we can do this together with your help at patreon.com/reluctantpreppers. Did you know you can buy silver at spot price? Get your 10-ounce bar of silver at spot price today. Go to sdbullion.com/RP. Not only will you be buying silver without any premium, you'll also be supporting the independent media. Reluctant Preppers gets a small commission when you take advantage of this special offer, going to sdbullion.com/RP. That's sdbullion.com/RP.
Think about the inflation that has happened. Look at the cost of food. Look at the cost of just go to the grocery store and look at the cost of what it takes just to buy the necessities of life now. And then ask yourself, well, wait a minute, if all these food prices are going up and all of these other commodity and energy prices are going up, I'm getting 0% on my money at the bank. What does that mean? That means that your savings are being robbed from you.
As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. Today we have a very special guest with us, Ann Barnhardt, founder of Barnhardt Capital Management, and now a freelance commentator on all things economic, political, liberty, and belief-minded. Ann is with us today to share her insights into how you can keep your savings intact. What are your options, and what are some of the risks that you can consider and avoid when finding out how to protect your nest egg? Ann, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Oh, thank you, sir, for having me. It's a pleasure to visit with you.
So there's many topics to cover here, and we'll try to keep moving along pretty briskly. The reason this came up for me and for a lot of the people who I've talked with is a lot of the old assumptions that people have made about where you can keep your savings safe are no longer true. And when I was a kid, my dad showed me a passbook savings account from a local bank that was a chain and said, you just keep putting your money here and they'll pay you interest. And he showed me how you get a penny here and 2 pennies there and it'll grow and grow. And he taught me about the rules of exponential growth and said, you keep going, those 1 to 2 pennies are going to double and double, and pretty soon you'll end up with a significant income. And as a child, I was kind of underwhelmed by that. I thought, really, 1 and 2 pennies a month is really going to get me somewhere? But later on, when I saw that the 6% interest on that savings account, after we got married in the Jimmy Carter years, it was a 12% CD we got, and that seemed pretty exciting. But now we're down at 0.00. People are losing track of the decimal places of how many zeros there are before the interest rate on any bank savings accounts. And also, when we watched our 401k at a previous employer, literally went from like a 401k down to a 101k on a market collapse. We started to think, well, we don't want anything to do with that, so we pulled our money out of the stock market and put it into what the brokerage told us was a cash equivalent money market fund. And lo and behold, after the 2008 collapse, we saw that that fund was locked. We couldn't get at any of those monies. And it took years for them to slowly release additional portions of that to us. And it turned out that that was collaterally damaged because it, on the backside, had been involved in Lehman Brothers. Seemed like we were darned if we did and darned if we didn't. If we kept our money in the bank, we'd get practically nothing in interest and we'd be falling behind inflation. If we kept our money in money markets, it was still tied up in this messy stock market. If we did in stocks, we knew we were vulnerable. We thought, okay, we'll hold in cash. So we held a significant amount of cash for a while, and then we got educated that with the Federal Reserve draining the value of the U.S. dollar by printing billions and billions of dollars every month, we're actually getting the value just sucked right out of those dollars we're holding, even if they're holding in our hand. So that just left us, well, what can you do? Where can you put your wealth where it's not just going to get stolen from you? So if you could just guide us through a few options that people should consider or should run away from. I know one of the things that some people have talked about is insurance policies, where there's a cash value of your insurance policy, and sometimes they're wondering, depending on their age, whether they should cash out of that. But I guess just starting from the basics and working us through some options that come to your mind, what are ways that people can keep their nest egg safe or reduce the risk of loss?
Sure. Well, the first foundational premise that people have to get their minds around, and I apologize to people out there who have heard other interviews that I've done or other podcasts that I've done. I feel like a broken record. I feel like I'm saying the same thing over and over and over again. But what I keep trying to remind myself is that with each one of these interviews, there are new people hearing this, and there might be people who have heard me talk about these concepts before, for whom the light bulb didn't click on, and if they hear it again, maybe this time the light bulb will click on over their head and they'll understand what I'm talking about. The core foundational premise in all of this, and the way you judge any sort of an asset in today's environment, is simply this. There is, for all intents and purposes, the rule of law is no longer in force. It is no longer extant in the former American Republic. The constitutional republic that was the United States of America has been overthrown. It's done. It's a fait accompli. The United States is now being ruled by a tyranny of a micro-oligarchy, and there's one set of rules for them, which is basically they do whatever they want. The Constitution be damned, the rule of law be damned, the federal statutes be damned. They can do anything they want. And then normal people, which is basically everybody else, which they are attempting to form into one massive underclass. They are attempting to completely destroy the entire concept of the middle class and just have one ginormous underclass that is under their jackboot. And obviously that is well on the way to happening. Look at the employment figures. Look at what Obamacare is doing to the economy. Look at what inflation is doing to people, et cetera, et cetera. This is clearly well on the path to a near perfect execution with basically no pushback at all. There is no rule of law. And so what that means is, in terms of financial products, banking, savings, et cetera, these people can steal money on a whim, and there is no one to turn to. You have no recourse, because the people who are doing the theft are members of the oligarchy. So normally in a normal, healthy society, the rule of law is embodied in the government. That is why the government exists, so that people have recourse, someone they can turn to when some injustice or theft is done, and the government is then charged with enforcing the rule of law equally, equal protection under the law. Obviously, that no longer exists. I personally, the reason why I'm kind of the for lack of a better word, the cheerleader for getting this concept out there is, of course, MF Global, John Corzine stealing $1.6 billion of customer segregated funds from a brokerage firm. This money was supposed to be completely safe, completely sacrosanct, and nothing happened. Nothing happened to this man. There was no rule of law. There was nowhere that the customers could turn to. They had their money stolen. They were locked out of their positions for over a week. They couldn't even liquidate their positions after having all their money stolen. They couldn't even get out of the positions that they were in. So some incurred even greater losses if the market moved against them for over a week. That was the watershed event. That event has and will go down in history. And as time moves forward and people are able to digest what's happened in this overthrow of the United States and this collapse of the United States, the MF Global theft will absolutely be a linchpin watershed event that is referenced. because it indicated that members of this micro-oligarchy, of which John Corzine was obviously a member and continues to be because there's been no law enforcement, these people are allowed to do absolutely anything they want. They can steal any amount of money, and there will be no legal recourse. Your money is not safe. And so the funny little mantra that I use and I tell people, and I've used for years, is if you can't roll around naked on top of something whilst holding your assault rifle to physically defend it, you really don't own it. This goes for all monies that are held in bank accounts, brokerage accounts, insurance policies, just et cetera, money market accounts, just Social Security, anything that you do not have, that you cannot hold physically in your hand, stand in front of with a firearm and physically defend, you have to be working under the assumption that this can be stolen from you at any moment. And so what we've learned over the last several years is that indeed the entire economy is a giant bubble and a joke. The stock market is a giant bubble and a joke. The only reason the Dow is where it is because the Federal Reserve is printing at minimum. This is the quantity that they confess to. They confess to printing and pumping directly into the stock market at least $85 billion with a B, $85 billion per month. That is issuing debt. The debt gets pumped into the banks then turn around and they are pumping that money into the equities market. That is the only reason why the Dow is where it is. People have learned the lesson over the last several years. People who wanted to get out of their 401ks and almost to a man have been told, no, I'm sorry, you cannot liquidate your 401k. You've put all of this money into these accounts. Your employment, our hiring of you, one of the big selling points for you coming on board with our company was this fabulous 401k program. But now that you want to actually liquidate that and take your money that was part of your compensation package for your time and your labor in working for this company, no, I'm sorry, you can't have that. And depending on how old you are, the line is that you will not be able to have access to that money for decades hence. Okay, stop and think about this. If you have quote unquote money, but you have zero access to it, you cannot withdraw it, bring it back into your own possession, and use it to spend on whatever you want. Dude, seriously, think about this. Is it really your money? Was it ever your money in the first place, or were you just swindled? They convinced you to take a lower actual salary in exchange for your time and your labor, with the promise that 40 years hence, oh yeah, you'll have all this money that we're going to take real good care of for you. Give me a break. Come on. So, that's one of the big questions that I get from people is, oh, the 401k. Well, lesson learned, kids, lesson learned. If you don't have access to that money, then it was never yours. One other point I'd like to make about 401ks is that as the owner of Barnhardt Capital Management, I was able to set up for myself a 401k program, which I contributed to for years. And of course, I was the administrator of that program. When I wanted to liquidate my 401k, since I was the plan administrator, all I had to do was sign 2 documents. It was 2 signatures. That's how easy it is in reality for a 401k plan to be liquidated. The reason why your employers won't do this and tell you, oh no, this is all completely impossible, is because they don't want the Ponzi scheme to collapse. And so when they come to you and they tell you that, oh, we're sorry, but it's just absolutely impossible for us to allow you to liquidate out of that account, that's not true. All it takes is for someone to sign on the dotted line. But when we're talking about these massive corporations with these enormous, some of them have billions of dollars in 401k holdings in the quote-unquote names of their employees, they have this massive incentive on the other side to not allow people out of that. But when they tell you it's impossible, understand that's not true. It's not impossible. It's just that they don't want to do it. They don't want to turn loose of that money, and they don't want to turn loose of whatever income it is that they are personally generating off of, you having that money in that 401k plan. So understand that. So obviously in terms of 401ks, you stop contributing. I mean, you stop contributing right now. You do whatever you can to get as much of that money out of there as you can. Some companies have loans that people can take out against 401ks. If that's the best you can do, then that's the best you can do. It's better than nothing. What else did you bring up? Interest, and watching, putting money into CDs and other interest-bearing accounts and watching it just all sit there and languish and die and be consumed by inflation. Well, certainly, I mean, you look at interest rates, the T-bill rate effectively went to zero. I mean, it plummeted in 2008. It went from being in the 5s for 90-day T-bills. It plummeted all the way down into the 1s, and then when Obama overthrew the government and was installed in January of 2009, the 90-day T-bill rate dropped almost immediately to zero. And so you have, in effect, a zero interest rate. But then think about what has happened in terms of real commodity prices. Think about the inflation that has happened. Look at the cost of food. Look at the cost of just go to the grocery store and look at the cost of what it takes just to buy the necessities of life now. And then ask yourself, well, wait a minute. With all these food prices are going up and all of these other commodity and energy prices are going up, I'm getting 0% on my money at the bank. What does that mean? That means that your savings are being robbed from you because there is real inflation. And the government has been, the Federal Reserve obviously has been and continues to just lie through its teeth about all of these numbers. The only thing, I'm not getting into hyper technical detail, the only thing that you need to know about the numbers that come out of the government with regards to inflation on consumer products is that food and energy is disqualified from the data set. I mean, that right there tells you everything that you need to know. So, granted, maybe the price of tea cozies in a junk shop somewhere are relatively stable, but the price of food is going through the roof. Well, the price of food or the price of electricity, that does not even go into the calculation. So that right there tells you, without knowing anything else and not needing to be any sort of an expert on economics, that fact tells you that the entire thing is a fraud and a con and a lie. And so is your money safe in the bank, even if it's a really good, sound, small local bank? Even in a small, sound local bank, no, it's not, because it's held in U.S. dollars, and the oligarchy that's in control in Washington, D.C., in pure Leninist fashion, is grinding down the middle class by inflating away the value of the U.S. dollar, but then maintaining this truly Orwellian propaganda line that there's no inflation and everything's fine. I mean, and I don't know if you guys follow Carl Denninger, who does great work, but he's been making the point for years that even if you buy the Federal Reserve's, we have a quote-unquote 2% annual inflation rate targeted, and that's what we're going for. If you do the math on that, on the compounding that you were talking about earlier, if you do the math on that, what that means is that over the course of a working man's 45-year career life, you are debasing his savings by just a mind-blowing amount. You're essentially stealing all of his savings capacity from him with just that openly admitted to 2% target inflation rate. So is your money safe in the bank? In the macro sense, no, it is not. And then the other question question that people have all the time is, well, even if my bank fails or even if there's a big structural collapse, I mean, there's still FDIC insurance, right, Ann? Okay, so we've got how many dollars are there in demand deposits in the U.S.? It's at least $10 trillion. There's at least $10 trillion in demand deposits in banks in the U.S. That is to say, checking accounts, savings accounts, et cetera, et cetera. A few years ago, right after the 2008 collapse, the FDIC was actually in the hole. It had less than no money, and so it had to collect 3 years worth of premiums from the banks in advance just to get itself back up to zero and then have a little bit of money to work with. A year ago, the FDIC had roughly 11 billion with a B, 11 billion in funds to backstop bank failures. We're talking about a system where there's over 10 trillion in demand deposits. And, you know, if you watch my economics presentation on YouTube and I go through how, you know, just the top 5 banks in the U.S. have derivatives exposure north of 225 trillion with a T dollars, and then you start thinking about these things and comparing these numbers, if there's any sort of when this comes apart, let me phrase it like that, when this comes apart, because it will eventually, even if you give the entire system a 90% haircut relative to the risk quantity that's on paper right now, you're still talking about trillions and trillions and trillions of demand deposits that there's no possible way that the FDIC could ever cover. And so the only thing that could be done at that point is for the government to print trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars, which of course has the consequence of further debasing the currency, further driving up the prices of all of these real commodities, and just destroying your life. So
yeah, essentially that's taking the money away from the people who have savings and giving it to those who supposedly were injured by these bank failures. So everybody ends up poorer that way.
Of course, absolutely. So the analogy that you have to make in terms of the FDIC is that A, it worked when you had a functioning government with a rule of law that wasn't just pathologically evil and actively looking to destroy the middle class and the economy of the United States. And B, any sort of a quote-unquote insurance program like the FDIC is analogous to the fire department. The fire department works great when one house catches on fire, and they can rush to that house and put the fire out at that one house. If the entire city catches on fire at the same time, then you know what? The fire department is powerless to do anything except stand and watch it burn with everybody else, because there simply isn't enough capacity in the fire department to go and put out an entire city burning to the ground at the same time. That's the situation with the FDIC. And lastly, the last point you brought up was in terms of insurance policies. It's kind of the same. It's the same idea. You're assuming that there's a rule of law. You're assuming that this economic paradigm is going to continue to persist in this mathematically impossible paradigm that it is now in. Understand that the insurance companies are one of the biggest players in these derivatives markets. They are the ones who are trading credit default swaps. They are the ones who are trading repos and reverse repos and all of these derivatives of derivatives of derivatives of derivatives. Who is buying up and trading these derivatives of, say, for example, European sovereign debt paper? It's insurance companies, because the way insurance companies make their money is that they're sitting on the premium base that they collect from people for these insurance policies. They take that money, and what they did previously is they invested it in all of these various interest-bearing products, which before could have been relatively low-risk paper, for example, like U.S. Treasury paper, which was considered the safest paper in the world. It was as close to zero risk as you could get. Okay, as soon as the Obama usurpation and installation takes place in 2009, the interest rate is synthetically, forcibly suppressed all the way down to zero. Insurance companies and other entities like brokerage firms like MF Global, who were using the interest markets in order to generate their income, That all disappeared because now interest rates are at zero. So what they had to do, and I put the word had in quotes, nobody has to do any of this, but what they had to do in order to replace the lost interest income from the loss of the U.S. paper market and just the general interest rate market in general, is that they had to start going into ever more riskier derivative products. And so they'd start making derivatives of, let's say, for example, Spanish sovereign debt. Okay, then all of the margin was driven out of that. So then someone else would go in and make a derivative of the Spanish sovereign debt market. And then that margin would be driven out. And we're now to the point where we're 6 or 7 derivative iterations into these markets where they just keep, it's like they just keep digging sub-basement after sub-basement after sub-basement. And eventually, and what you realize then is when you're now 6 or 7 sub-basements deep under a structure, there's nothing solid underneath the structure itself. It's all been hollowed out and tunneled out by these derivatives markets. That's what these insurance companies are trading. So let's say you're 50 years old and you've got some life insurance policy that you've been paying into. Let's say it's a $500,000 life insurance policy. It has a liquidation value right now of, let's call it $70,000 or something like that. You're 50 years old. Odds are that if you don't die in this counter-revolutionary world war that's going to happen, if you don't die in that, if you live to natural old age, you've got another, 25, 35 years in front of you before this life insurance policy would ever presumably pay out. Do you honestly think that the insurance company is still going to be around? Do you think that there's going to be a rule of law to enforce all of this? Boy, if I was in that position, I would say cash out of that insurance policy, pay off whatever debt that you have, get as completely detached from this bubble, this horrific bubble of a system, and get that money out now, because the assumption that that the insurance company is even going to exist and that you're going to be able to collect on any of that is specious at best.
And what about, I was taught as a kid that Social Security is something that got put in place to help make sure that people wouldn't mismanage their own personal retirement, and that we'd be, every paycheck you'd see that you're making a deposit, your employer's making a deposit, and every year they send you a summary that says this is the value that's building up. If you retired today or at the age of 62 or 65, this is what you'd reclaim. And then we've been hearing that those funds have been mismanaged by the government after all, and they aren't there. Is this another example of you thought you put your money somewhere safe and it got robbed out the back door?
Well, of course. And, there's a certain point where the people themselves are responsible for this. Anybody with a brain in their head should have known from the very beginning that Social Security, Medicare, all of these other programs, that these were Ponzi schemes. These were just flat-out Ponzi schemes, put in place by Marxists like FDR. Voted in happily by the first generation of people who, as with any Ponzi scheme, the first generation in, those are the only people who actually benefit from it, because they get payout on it without ever having to pay anything into it. And this is actually a criticism, and this is very politically incorrect to do, but this is a criticism of the so-called greatest generation, the World War II generation. The World War II generation, for all of the sacrifices that they did in fact make in the Second World War, those are the people, and let's be honest, also World War I veterans as well. Those are the people who installed this Ponzi scheme, and they were the ones who reaped the benefit of it because they got the payout on it in their old age, and they had never paid into it in their youth. Textbook Ponzi scheme. Yes, Social Security is a complete scam, a complete fraud. And again, at some point, people have to take personal responsibility for this. It has been clear for many decades that the people who are populating the government, most especially the upper echelons of the federal government in the United States, are by and large a cadre of psychopaths and whores. And so if you willingly have turned your savings over to these people, if you have willingly bought into this line that a cadre of psychopaths and whores, many of whom do not have the brains God gave a goldfish and couldn't think their way out of a wet paper sack, if you voluntarily allow your wage to be confiscated and turned over to these people under the premise that they know best and they can manage my life and my retirement and my savings better than I can, there's a certain point where, you know what, you deserve what you get. You will reap what you have sown. And turning your life over to these people who it's very, very clear, and like I said, it's been clear for decades, these people are not right. These are not good people. These people do not have the best interests of the people that they are allegedly representing in mind. These people are in government to personally enrich themselves and to satisfy their personal lust for power over other human beings. You people have voluntarily cooperated in this. And so now Social Security, in order to be psychologically healthy and not be just utterly consumed with rage, my advice to people, and this also goes to some extent for 401k accounts that you simply cannot get your hands on. Psychologically, you just need to come to grips with the fact that that money was stolen from you. It was never yours. You never had it to begin with. It's all a lie. You fell for a con. You allowed to perpetuate these Ponzi schemes and these cons and just write it off. You're not going to get it. You're not going to get it.
And furthermore, as long as your primary or sole source of family income is from a W-2 type job, then it's going to continue to be, what does it total up to between employer's share, employee's share, and Medicare? It's up like over 16, 17, 18% of your pay that's going off into that direction, never to be seen again.
Yeah, I mean, you can't get away from it if you're, like you said, if you're still in a W-2 type of a position. The one thing you can do in terms of the income tax is you can kick up you can maximize the number of dependents, which means reducing your withholding to zero or almost zero, and then not file. And you know my position. I declared a tax strike years ago. I formally declared a tax strike after MF Global because at that point it was just, between MF Global and then right fast on the heels of MF Global is when the Obamacare mandate, they started explicitly telling people that you will be paying for abortions through Obamacare. They weren't even trying to be coy about it anymore. You will pay a $1 a month surcharge on your insurance policy, which is mandatory that you purchase. And every person who has an insurance policy in the United States, which everyone must as a consequence of their waking up breathing, it will pay for abortion. So I had two events in close succession, MF Global and then this business about paying for abortions. At that point, it became crystal clear to me that I could no longer in good conscience pay into this. Now, granted, I was self-employed, so that opened up, it made it a lot easier for me. But the only way this works is if this is coupled with a strike and people just stop filing. Force them to come after everyone, or at least millions and millions and millions of people. I mean, this business of just standing by and watching, and even in a sense cooperating with this, to my mind, it's just morally untenable. It's morally unjustifiable. It's clear what the situation is. It's clear that the U.S. has been overthrown. It's clear that this regime is just overtly satanic. And I know it's scary and it's intimidating, but, again, we've brought this on ourselves. So you can't expect that you're going to get out of this without feeling some pain and exposing yourself to potential pain. The only thing I can say is having faith in God really, really helps all of that. But that's probably a conversation for another episode.
So we've been down a long road here in terms of stocks have inherent volatility and risk that most people are aware of that. We talked about bonds having gone to pretty much zero yield, so people have looked into money markets, which have gone to zero yield, savings accounts, which not only are close to zero yield, but they have multiple kinds of risks because the dollars that are just sitting there are being inflated away. It's actually like somebody vacuuming the value out of your savings account while your back is turned. Even though the numbers stay the same, the value is going out. And also, if the bank were to fail, the FDIC, as you said, doesn't have enough backing to be able to bail out, to really stand behind it. And then you've talked about insurance being leveraged through these derivatives and the backside of them trying to make their money, facing some of the same low interest challenges that other people have become hugely riskful. So let's see, what else is there? Oh, the new kid on the block, Bitcoin. What do you think of that as people see the future?